There's no question prostitution and sex trafficking is a big problem to solve.
Every year in Minnesota, thousands of women and girls are trafficked and sold for sex. And joining us now with more on the problem and what can be done about it is Noel with Breaking Free, an organization that helps victims. Noel, thanks so much for joining us. Obviously, there's been a lot of talk about this high-profile case. How big of a problem is prostitution in the suburbs?
Well, that's a common question. People want to know, is it happening in my community, and what are the numbers? The reality is it's really hard to give you a straight number. What we do know from our law enforcement partners is that when they run these sting operations, within less than a minute of posting an ad on Backpage, they get hundreds of calls, more calls than they can even process and book. We also know that from our standpoint, working with victims, we've got 500 victims on average that we work with every year. So that's just one organization in one city in the state. So you know that's just the tip of the iceberg.
What about these victims, girls and women, right? And how do they get trapped into this?
Well, it's basically victims come from all walks of life. They come from all socioeconomic statuses, races, genders. Primarily the victims are women and girls, and they enter in when they're juveniles. The average age of entry is between 12 and 14. So think about what we know when kids are 12 to 14 years old, their vulnerabilities. There's other added risk factors like a race and gender and homelessness and past history of child sexual abuse, and all of those compound to make a victim incredibly vulnerable, not only to being bought, but also to being sold.
There's a March report on sex trafficking by the League of Women Voters in Minneapolis, and it shows it's a costly societal problem. The report also shows that every public dollar spent to prevent sex trafficking potentially saves the taxpayer $34 in return. Tell us about some of those efforts to prevent it, and is the issue, do you think, being treated seriously enough?
I believe when people are talking about sex trafficking, there's a lot of folks starting to pay attention. What we're not starting to hold as in much high regard is the prostitution, and that's the issue. We're not drawing the connection between prostitution and sex trafficking. The reality is sex trafficking wouldn't exist without prostitution, and prostitution wouldn't exist without men who are willing to buy. It is worth making an investment in combating sex trafficking. We need to look at prevention, right? Primary prevention means stopping the harm before it starts. That doesn't just mean knowledge bases at an individual level, but we're also talking about a paradigm shift. We're talking about societal and environmental changes where it's not okay to buy and sell human beings.
Wow, very interesting. Thanks, Noel, for being here. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it. For more information on Breaking Free, you can call them at 651-645-6557, or you can go online to breakingfree.net.